Okay, start. So we are reading the Celestine Prophecy. We are in chapter 4, The Struggle for Power, page number 90 of the book and 51 of the PDF.
Is 133 of my book. Did you see that girl? He asked, looking at me. She's a classic example of psychological violence. This is what the human need to control others leads to when taken to the extreme. The old man and woman are dominating the girl totally. Did you see how nervous and stooped she was?
So again,
Yes, I said.
so now the what was the incident? They had gone to this inn, and the wife and the daughter was serving the guests. That is Will, the hero, and that other friend of theirs which they've just found. Now, as the girl became a little clumsy and she dropped something, and the father and mother started shouting at the girl. So the father and mother were totally dominating the girl, and in that dominance they were attempting to grab power from the girl, so they were dispowering the girl. So this is what she's saying. This is what the human need to control others leads to when taken to the extreme. The old man and woman are totally dominating the girl, so that dominance is there. There is no free flow of energy. You're attempting to extract energy from the other person.
Yes, I said, but it appears she's fed up. Exactly. Her parents have never let up, and from her point of view, she has no choice but to lash out violently.
So
It
now,
is
what is happening here? Till a certain extent, she will accept that dominance. Okay, but there will come a point, a tipping point will come when she has to react violently to that particular dominance.
it is the only way she can gain some control for herself. Unfortunately, when she grows up, because of this early trauma, she will think she has to seize control and dominate others with the same intensity.
Now, this is important here again, that because she was dominated in the way that she was dominated, it will create a pattern in her life which will result in her dominating others in the same manner as she was dominated, because that's the only way that she knows to keep control for herself with herself. Okay, so this is how the genetics or characteristics get passed on genetically speaking.
Please make me co host. This characteristic will be deeply ingrained and will make her just as dominating as her parents are now, especially when she is around people who are vulnerable, such as children.
Now, again, so children do not have boundaries about themselves. There is a merger. Yesterday, even Conore was saying a baby does not have any boundaries. So children don't have really any boundaries. They don't have any distinctions. They have not yet developed an ego when they are young, from age of 1 to 6. Of course, nowadays children, because of exposure of TV, etc., are developing a ego for themselves much before that. But generally speaking, the child does not have an ego. So if a person who's dominating at that point in time starts to dominate the child, then it becomes ingrained into the characteristics of the child, and then it starts perpetuating through the generations.
In fact, the same trauma, no doubt, happened to her parents before her. They have to dominate now because of the way their parents dominated them. That's the means through which psychological violence is passed down from one generation to another.
So now there is a lineage which is created. So the grandparents must have done it to the parents. The parents are now doing it to the child. So what you learn, what you experience, that is what you're going to pass on. So this is where your awareness starts to come into play. What are you consciously aware of? Are you observing the patterns which are there in your life? These patterns are which get perpetuated and then passed down through the genealogy. So if you can cut nip the thing, nip the bud in the, you nip the bud when it is just starting to grow, or you actually realize that there is a pattern which you are perpetuating, that's when you can only transcend it. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to transcend it. You don't have control over it. This also leads to the concept of the amygdala hijack. I don't know if you've spoken about it, but the amygdala is a part of the brain, which is a part of the hypothalamus, which acts or makes us go into the flight and fight response. So that's when the hijack takes place. Whenever you are in a pattern, the amygdala starts to get into action because it's becoming reactive rather than thinking with the cognitive brain, which is the frontal cortex. You're thinking with the reptilian brain, which makes you do stuff which you are not really ready to do, but it just happens. So always when you do that action, there'll be a regret later on that why did I do it? I did not need to take that action.
Renu stopped suddenly. I need to get my sleeping bag out of the truck, he said. I'll be down in a second. I nodded, and Will and I continued towards the campsite. You and Renu have been talking a lot, Will remarked. Yes, we have, I said. He smiled. Actually, Renu has been doing most of the talking. You listen. Can you mute everyone? You and Renu have been talking a lot, Will remarked. Yes, we have, I said. He smiled. Actually, Renu has been doing most of the talking. You listen and answer direct questions, but you don't offer much. I'm interested in what he has to say, I said defensively. Will ignored my tone. Did you see the energy moving between the members of that family? The man and woman were sucking the child's energy into themselves until she was almost dead.
So again, over here, two things fact. I am interested in what he has to say. I said defensively. So as soon as you're getting defensive, which side of the grid are you in? You're on the left side of the grid. Okay. So again, you're depleting yourself. Will ignored that. And then he made the statement that did you observe the energy? Now, Will could see the energy, but at that point, he did not get aware of seeing the energy. Now, what Will saw was that the father and mother were literally sucking the life out of the child.
I forgot to watch the energy flow, I said. Well, don't you think Renu would like to see it? What do you make of running into him in the first place? I don't know. Don't you think it has some meaning? We were driving down the road and you see someone who reminds you of an old friend, and when we meet him, he happens to also be looking for the manuscript. Doesn't that sound beyond coincidence?
So now what is
Yes,
happening? Now what is
perhaps
happening
you
again?
met.
Shivangla, 1 second. Now again, what is happening here is that Will is pointing to the hero that you need to start observing the coincidences where something is happening. So anything that happens, there's a reason behind that happening. And if we can contemplate as to what is the reason, then we can get a deeper meaning into whatever is happening.
Perhaps you met so that you could receive some information that will extend your journey here. And doesn't it follow that perhaps you have some information for him as well?
So again over here,
Yes, I guess so.
nothing happens because of a coincidence. Okay. So again, what is Will saying? That he may have a message for you, you have a message for him. But for that message to transmute, you have to be able to communicate properly.
Yes, I guess so. What do you think I should tell him? Will again looked at me with his characteristic warmth. The truth, he said. Before I could say anything else, Renu came bounding down the path towards us. I bought a flashlight in case we need it later, he said.
So
For
now
the
again,
first time,
over
I-
here, what is Will saying? You have to say the truth. Now, when we are saying the truth, are we operating from right side of the grid or the left side of the grid? Truth will always be on the right side of the grid. Truth has power with it. You don't have any guilt when you're saying the truth. When you are lying, That is when the guilt comes in and you get into the left side of the grid. So Will is telling him that you operate from the right side of the grid and say the truth. That is what you need to tell this gentleman.
For the first time, I became aware of the twilight and looked west. The sun had already set, but the sky was still a bright orange. The few clouds in that direction carried a darker reddish color. For an instant, I thought I saw a whitish field of light around the plants in the foreground. But the image faded. Beautiful sunset, I said. Then noticed Will had disappeared into his tent and Renu was pulling his sleeping bag from its case.
So now
Yes, it is,
again,
Renu said.
twilight. Shivangla, 1 second. Twilight is an ideal time for us to be able to see the auras. So the sun was setting and he could see that glow. But then to be able to see that glow, you have to maintain your energy state and you have to maintain your focused concentration also, your focused awareness to be able to see that field. Okay. Now he was losing it because Rene came, he was going in and out of that state, so he couldn't hold to be able to see the aura of the plants.
Yes, it is, Renu said distractedly without looking. I walked over to where he was working. He looked up and said, I didn't get to ask you, what insights have you seen? The first two were only described to me, I replied. But we just spent the last 2 days at the Vicient Lodge near Satipo, where while we were there, one of the people doing research gave me a copy of the third insight. It's pretty amazing. His eyes lit up. Do you have it with you? Yes. Do you want to look at it? He jumped at the opportunity and took it into his tent to read. I found some matches and old newspaper and started the fire. After it was burning brightly, Will crawled out of his tent. Where's Renu? He asked. He's reading the translation Sarah gave me, I said. Will walked over and sat on a smooth log someone had placed near the fire area. I joined him. Darkness had finally descended, and nothing could be seen except for the bare outline of the trees to our left, the dim lights from the station behind us, and a muted glow from Renu's tent. The woods were alive with night sounds, some of which I had never heard before. After about 30 minutes, Renu emerged from his tent, the flashlight in his hand. He walked over and sat at my left. Will was yawning. That insight is amazing, he said. Could anyone there actually see those energy fields? I briefly told him of my experiences, beginning with our arrival and proceeding through the point where I actually saw fields myself. He was silent for a minute, then he asked, they were actually doing experiments where they projected their own energy onto plants and affected the plants' growth? It affected their nutritional potency too, I said. But the main insight is broader than that, he commented, almost to himself. The third insight is that the universe on the whole is made up of this energy, and we can affect perhaps not only plants, but other things as well, just by what we do with the energy that belongs to us, the part we can control. He paused for a full minute. I wonder how we affect other people with our energy.
So again,
Will looked at me and
the
smiled.
universe is totally made out of energy fields, and everything is ultimately a field. Okay, and the fields are constantly interacting and associating with each other. So there's a constant flux of energy all the time, all around us. And our thoughts, what we are doing, our thoughts and actions affect this energy field, and every other person's action and thought also affects us, but depends on whether we hold our resilience and we have a powerful field around us or not. Okay, and then what we do with our energy becomes extremely important.
Will looked at me and smiled. I'll tell you what I saw, I said. I witnessed an argument between two people, and their energies were doing really strange things. Renu pushed up his glasses again. Tell me about that. Will stood up at this point. I think I need to turn in, he said. It's been a long day. We both said good night and Will entered his tent. Afterward, I described as best as I could what Sarah and the other scientists had said to each other, emphasizing the action of their energy fields. Now, wait a minute, Renu said. You saw their energies pulling at each other, trying to say, capture each other as they argued? That's right, I said. He was thoughtful for a few seconds. We must analyze this fully. We had two people arguing over who had the correct view of the situation, over who was right, each seeking to win out over the other, even to the point of invalidating the other's confidence and to outright name calling. Suddenly he looked up. Yes, this all makes sense. What do you mean? I said. The movement of this energy, if we can systematically observe it, is a way to understand what humans are receiving when we compete and argue and harm each other. When we control another human being, we receive their energy. We fill up at the other's expense, and the filling up is what motivates us. Look, I must learn how to see these energy fields. Where is this Vicient Lodge? How do I get there?
So again, what is this all about, right? Competition. We are all attempting to grab from the other guy. So for selfish reasons, we are grabbing, and this control is what really creates the problems.
I told him the general location, but said he would have to ask Will for specific directions. Yes, I'll do that tomorrow, he said with commitment. For now, I should get some sleep. I want to leave as early as possible. He said good night, then disappeared into his tent, leaving me alone with the crackling fire and the night sounds. When I awoke, Will was already out of the tent. I could smell the aroma of hot cereal. I slipped out of my sleeping bag and looked out through the tent flap. Will was holding a pan over the fire. Renu was nowhere to be seen and his tent was gone. Where's Renu? I asked, climbing out and walking over to the fire. He's already packed up, Will said. He's up there working on his truck, getting ready so he can leave as soon as his part comes in. Will handed me a bowl of oatmeal and we sat on one of the logs to eat. Did you two stay up late talking? Will asked. Not really, I said. I told him all I knew. Just then we heard sounds from the path. Renu was hurriedly walking down to us. I'm all prepared, he said. I must say goodbye. After several minutes of conversation, Renu walked back up the steps and left. Will and I took turns bathing and shaving in the station owner's bathroom. Then we packed our gear, filled the vehicle with gas, and departed heading north. How far is Kula? I asked. We should be there before nightfall if we are lucky, he said, then added, so what did you learn from Renu? I looked closely at him. He seemed to be looking for a specific answer. I don't know, I said. What conception did leave with you? That we humans, although we are unconscious of it, have the tendency to control and dominate others. We want to win the energy that exists between people. It builds us up somehow, makes us feel better. Will was looking straight ahead at the road. He looked as if he was suddenly thinking of something else.
So now this is very important, okay? Although we are unconscious of it, we have a tendency to control and dominate others. We want to win the energy that exists between people. It builds us up somehow. So this is basically an ego trip, that when you dominate someone or you grab energy from someone, the ego gets inflated. The ego feels nice about it. That is why people tend to keep doing it.
Why do you ask? I inquired. Is this the fourth insight? He looked at me. Not quite. You have seen the energy flow between people, but I'm not sure you know how it feels when it happens to you.
So now what happens? He has knowledge that this happens, but he has not experienced it for himself. So again, knowledge plus experience will result in wisdom. So now he Will is going to I guess Will is now going to make him experience it.
Then tell me how it feels, I said, growing exasperated. You accuse me of not talking. Getting information out of you is like pulling teeth. I've been trying for days to find out more about your past experiences with the manuscript, and all you do is put me off. He laughed, then shot me a smile. We had a deal, remember? I have a reason for being secretive. One of the insights concerns how to interpret the events of one's past life. It is a process of becoming clear about who you are, what you are here on this planet to do. I want to wait until we reach this insight before we discuss my background, okay?
So now this is one
I,
of the
s-
insights coming in, that you review your past life as to what are the lessons that you have learned in your life. Okay, but it's coming, so we'll wait for it.
I smiled at his adventurous tone. Yeah, I guess. For the remainder of the morning, we rode in silence. The day was sunny and the sky blue. Occasionally, as we proceeded higher into the mountains, thick clouds would float across our path, covering the windshield with moisture. Around noon, we pulled over at an overlook that afforded a spectacular view of the mountains and valleys to the east. Are you hungry? Will asked. I nodded, and he pulled out two carefully wrapped sandwiches from a bag on the back seat. After he handed me one of them, he asked, "What do you think about this view?" "It's beautiful." He smiled slightly and stared at me, giving me the impression that he was observing my energy field. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just looking," he said. "Mountain peaks are special places that can build energy in whomsoever sits on them. You look as though you have an affinity for mountain overlooks."
So again,
I t-
mountains and near the sea, okay, both of them empower us. So that's why the yogis all they all went to the mountains to meditate.
I told Will of my grandfather's valley and of the ridge overlooking the lake, and how it had made me feel alert and energized the same day Charlene had arrived. "Perhaps growing up there," he said, "prepared you for something here, now." I was about to ask him more about the energy that mountains provide when he added, "When a virgin forest is on a mountain, the energy is amplified even more."
So the
Is the
virgin
virgin
the
forest
virgin forest has the natural energy field. Okay, it has grown on its own. There is no human intervention. So it has a different charm. It has a totally different energy around it. And when it is the mountain acts like an amplifier of that particular energy. So it amplifies the energy.
Is the virgin forest we're headed for on a mountain? I asked. "Look for yourself," he said. "You can see it." He pointed towards the east. Miles away, I could see two ridges which ran parallel to each other for what looked like several miles. Then they converged, forming a V shape. In the space between the two ridges lay what looked like a small town, and at the vortex, the point where the two ridges met, the mountain rose sharply and butted off into a rocky summit. The summit appeared slightly higher than the ridge we were on, and the area around its base seemed much greener, as though covered with lush foliage. "That area of green?" I asked. "Yes," Will said. "It's like Vicient, yet more powerful and special." "How is it special?" "It facilitates one of the other insights." "How?" I asked. He started the jeep and pulled back onto the road. "I'm betting," he said, "that you will find out." Neither of us said much more for an hour or so. Then I drifted off to sleep. Some time later, Will was shaking my arm. "Wake up," he said. "We are coming into Kula." I sat up in the seat. Ahead of us, in a valley where two roads came together, was a small town. On both sides were the two ridges we had seen. The trees on the ridges seemed as large as those as at Vicente and spectacularly green. I want to tell you something before we drive in there, he said. In spite of the energy of this forest, this town is a lot less civilized than other areas of Peru. It's known as a place to get information about the manuscript, but the last time I was here, it was full of greedy types who didn't feel the energy and didn't understand the insights. They merely wanted the money or recognition they might get by discovering the ninth. I looked at the village. It consisted of 4 or 5 streets and avenues. Larger frame buildings lined the two main roads that crossed in the center of town, but the other streets were little more than alleyways lined by small dwellings. Parked at the crossroads were perhaps a dozen off the road vehicles and trucks. Why are all these people here? I asked. He smiled daringly. Because it's one of the last places to get gas and supplies before going deeper into the mountains. He started the jeep and drove slowly into town, then stopped in front of one of the larger buildings. I couldn't read the Spanish signs, but from the products in the window, I presumed it was a grocery and hardware. Wait here for a minute, he said. I want to go in for a few things. I nodded, and Will disappeared inside. As I looked around, a truck pulled up across the street, and several people got out. One was a dark haired woman in a fatigue jacket. To my amazement, I realized it was Marjorie. She and a young man in his early 20s crossed the street and walked right in front of me. I opened my door and got out. Marjorie, I yelled. She stopped and looked around, then saw me and smiled. Hello, she said, as she began to walk towards me. The young man grabbed her arm. Robert told us not to talk with anyone, he said very softly, trying not to let me overhear. It's okay, she said. I know this person. Go on in.
So now what
He
happened?
looked
Now
at me
Marjorie again
skeptically.
suddenly has come back. Okay. So again, Marjorie keeps coming back into his life. So there definitely has to be some meaning or something that has to transpire between the two of them. Now Marjorie, as you can see, this she it seems that she has joined another group. She left Vincent, and she's joined the other group, and the other group is controlled by this guy called Robert, and who's handling them very very strictly. Okay.
He looked at me skeptically, then backed away and went into the store. I tried then, in a stuttering way, to explain what had happened between us at the gardens. She laughed and told me Sarah had related everything to her. She was about to say something else when Will walked out with a handful of supplies. I introduced them, and we all talked for a few minutes as Will placed the supplies in the back of the jeep. I have an idea, Will said. Let's get something else to eat across the street. I looked over at what appeared to be a small cafe. Sounds good to me, I said. I don't know, Marjorie said. I need to leave soon. My ride. Where are you going? I asked. Back to the west, a couple of miles. I've come up to visit a group studying the manuscript. We can take you back later after dinner, Will commented. Well, I guess that will be okay. Will looked at me. I have one more thing to pick up. You two go ahead.
Will looked at me.
Will looked at me. I have one more thing to pick up. You two go ahead and order, and I'll
नहीं
order
नहीं
something
done.
when I get there. Arey, who's that?
ठीक है करो चलो.
Will looked at me. I have one more thing to pick up. You two go ahead and order, and I'll order something. When I get there, I'll only be a few minutes. We agreed, and Marjorie and I waited as several trucks passed. Will walked down the street to the south. Suddenly, the young man with whom Marjorie had arrived walked out of the store and confronted us again. Where are you going? He said, holding her arm. This is a friend of mine, she replied. We're going to eat and then he can run me back later. Look, you can't trust anyone up here. You know Robert wouldn't approve. It's okay, she said. I want you to come with me now. I took his arm and pulled it off Marjorie. You heard what she told you, I said. He stepped back and looked at me, suddenly appearing very timid. He turned and walked back into the store.
So now again over here, you
Let's
see the interaction, right? Now he's acting as an aggressor as far as Marjorie is concerned. But as soon as someone stands up to him, he backs down and becomes a timid person. So again, this is again a power play going on between the three of them.
go, I said. We walked across the street and into the small diner. The eating area consisted of one room and just 8 tables and was permeated with the smell of grease and smoke. I spotted an unoccupied table on the left. As we walked over, several people glanced up at us for an instant, then returned to what they were doing. The waitress spoke only Spanish, but Marjorie knew the language well and ordered for both. Afterwards, Marjorie looked at me warmly. I grinned at her. Who is that guy you were with? That's Kenny, she said. I don't know what's wrong with him. Thanks for helping. She was looking directly into my eyes, and her comment made me feel wonderful. How did you get connected with that group? I asked. Robert Jensen is an archaeologist. He's formed a group to study the manuscript and to search for the ninth insight. He came by Vicente a few weeks back, then again a couple of days ago. What? I asked. Well, I was in a relationship at Vicente that I wanted to get away from. Then I met Robert, and he was so charming, and what he was doing seemed so interesting. He convinced me that our research at the gardens would be enhanced by the ninth insight, and that he was on his way to find it. He said searching for this insight would be the most exciting thing he has ever done. And when he offered me a place on his team for a few months, I decided to accept. She paused again and looked down at the table. She appeared uncomfortable, so I changed the subject. How many of the insights have you read? Only the one I saw at Vicente. Robert has some others, but he believes people have to rid themselves of their traditional beliefs before they can understand them. He says he would rather they learn the key concepts from him. I must have frowned because she added, You don't like that much, do you? It sounds suspicious, I said. She looked at me intensely again. I've wondered about it too. Maybe when you take me back, you can talk with him and tell me what you think. The waitress arrived and brought our food, and as she was walking away, I saw Will come in the door. He walked quickly to our table.
So
I've
now
got to
again,
meet some
what
people.
happens that Jensen, he actually wanted to control the group. So he was wanting them to just listen to what he was explaining about the insight, which is normally what happens with all these religious groups also, where the person who actually started the religion had a spiritual experience or an out of body experience, and then he started preaching. But then slowly the people who are following him have not had that same experience. So the teachings get degenerated. So over here, Jensing is wanting that everyone listens to his interpretation of the insights rather than allowing people to generate their own understanding of the insights.
I've got to meet some people about a mile north of here, he said. I'll be gone about 2 hours. Take the jeep and take Marjorie back. I'm riding with someone else. He shot me a smile. We can meet back here. The thought came to me to tell him about Robert Jensen, but I decided against it. Okay, I said. He looked at Marjorie. Nice to have met you. Wish I had time to stay and talk. She looked at him with her coy expression. Maybe some other time. He nodded, handed me the keys, and walked away.
So now again over
Marjorie
here
ate for a
also
few.
there is one thing. The thought came to me to tell him about Robert Jensen, but I decided against it. Now as we start getting into the flow, you start getting a feeling as to what you need to say and what you don't need to say. Okay. Many times we start saying stuff that we don't need to say, and many times the inverse happens where we need to say something and we don't say it. So as we go into these states, that little bit of that, that feel starts to automatically develop.
Marjorie ate for a few minutes, then said, He seems like a man with a purpose. How did you meet him? I told her in detail of my experiences upon first arrival in Peru. As I talked, she listened intently. So intently, in fact, that I found myself telling the story with great ease and expressing the dramatic turns and episodes with insight and true flair. She seemed spellbound, hanging on every word.
So now what happens?
Goodness, she said at one point.
Whenever anyone pays attention to us, okay, they start giving us energy. So Marjorie was paying attention to him. So naturally she was transmuting love energy to him. I mean, I'm just terming it love energy, but uplifting energy to him. So his ability to do what he was doing got enhanced. So what he says over here, I found myself telling the story with great ease and expressing dramatic turns of and episodes with insight and a true flair. So what happened? Marjorie paying attention to him, sending him energy, lifted his ability to be able to perform the task that he was performing. Now this is something which happens to all of us. When we send a reball to someone, what are we doing? We are sending that field, we are creating a field around that person which will allow him or her to function at their potential, to function at their best. But then there is no connection of a take back from that person. It's a genuine, heartfelt giving. Okay, that's what makes that shift. When you're genuinely heartfelt, feel fullnessly giving, or whether you're wanting to extract something from that other person. Okay, so here Marjorie was just giving it to him.
Goodness, she said at one point. Do you think you're in danger? No, I don't think so, I said. Not this far from Lima. She was still looking at me expectantly. So while we finished eating, I briefly summarized the events at Vicient up to the point where Sarah and I had arrived at the gardens. That's where I met you, I said, and you ran off. Oh, it wasn't like that, she said. I just didn't know you. And when I saw your feelings, I thought it was best to leave. Well, I apologize, I said, chuckling, for letting my energy get out of hand. She looked at her watch. I guess I should be getting back. They'll be wondering about me. I left enough money for the bill and we walked outside to Will's Jeep. The night was chilly and we could see a trace of our breath. As we got in, she said, Head back north on this road. I'll tell you when to turn. I nodded and made a quick U turn in the street and headed that way. Tell me more about this farm we are going to, I said. I think Robert rents it. Apparently, his group has been using it for a long time while he has studied the insights. Since I've been there, everyone has been assembling supplies and readying the vehicles, things like that. Some of his men seem very rough. Why did he invite you along? I asked. He said he wanted a person who could help interpret the last insight once we found it. At least that's what he said back at Vicient. Here, he has only talked about supplies and helping to prepare for the trip. Where is he planning to go? I don't know, she replied. He never answers me when I ask. After about a mile and a half, she pointed out to a turn to the left onto a narrow rocky road. It meandered up a ridge and down into a flat valley. Ahead was a farmhouse made of rough planking. Behind it were several barns and outbuildings. 3 llamas peered at us from a fence fenced pasture. As we slowed to a stop, several people walked around the vehicle and stared without smiling. I noticed a gas powered electric generator humming at the side of the house. Then the door opened and a tall, dark haired man with strong, lean features walked towards us. That's Robert, Marjorie said. Good, I said, still feeling strong and confident. We got out as Jensen walked up to us. He looked at Marjorie. I was worried about you, he said. I understand you ran into a friend. I introduced myself and he shook my hand firmly. I'm Robert Jensen, he said. Glad you two are all right. Come in. Inside, several people busied themselves with supplies. One carried a tent and camping gear towards the back. Through the dining room, I noticed two Peruvian women in the kitchen, packing food. Jensen sat in one of the chairs in the living room and directed us to two others. Why did you say you were glad we were all right? I asked. He bent towards me and asked me in a sincere tone, how long have you been in this area? Only since this afternoon. Then you couldn't know how dangerous it is here. People are disappearing. Have you heard of the manuscript of the missing ninth insight? Yes, I have, in fact. Then you need to know what's going on. He interrupted. The search for the last insight is getting ugly. There are dangerous people involved in this. Who? I asked. People who don't care about the archaeological value of this discovery at all. People who just want the insight for their own purposes. A huge man with a beard and paunch interrupted the conversation and showed Jensen a list. They discussed something briefly in Spanish. Jensen looked at me again. Are you here to find the missing insight too? He asked. Do you have any idea what you're getting into? I felt awkward and had difficulty expressing myself. Well, I'm mainly interested in finding out more about the entire manuscript. I haven't seen that much of it yet. He straightened in his chair, then said, do you realize that the manuscript is a state artifact and that copies of it have been made illegal except by permit? Yes, but some scientists disagree with that. They feel the government is suppressing new. Don't you think the nation of Peru has the right to control its own archaeological treasures? Does the government know that you're in this country? I didn't know what to say. The surge of anxiety in my stomach was back. Look, don't get me wrong, he said, smiling. I'm on your side. If you have some sort of academic support from outside the country, then tell me. But I get the feeling you're just floating around. Something like that, I said.
So over
I
here,
noticed.
one thing is there that see when he was coming into Peru, he got that queasiness in his stomach. So where was he operating from? There was an apprehension, there was a fear, right? Now, as soon as he checked out of that state of consciousness, now over here again that state of consciousness is coming back. That's why we have to keep clearing, keep clearing, keep clearing, because a small trigger can bring a habit or a pattern back into our life.
I noticed Marjorie's focus had shifted from me to Jensen. What do you think he should do? She asked. Jensen stood up and smiled. I could perhaps work you into a position with us here. We need more people. Where we are going is relatively safe, I think, and you could find some avenues home along the way if things didn't work out. He looked at me closely. But you'll have to be willing to do exactly as I say every step of the way. I glanced over at Marjorie. She was still looking at Jensen. I felt confused. Perhaps I should consider Jensen's offer, I thought. If he was in good standing with the government, then this might be the only opportunity I had for a legitimate way back to the States. Perhaps I had been fooling myself. Perhaps Jensen was right and I was in way over my head.
So again, Jensen wants
I
to
think you
control
should
everything.
consider.
So over here again, Jensen wants to control everything. He's clearly telling that person that you have to do what I tell you to do. You cannot do anything else.
I think you should consider what Robert is saying, Marjorie commented. It's too frightening out there alone. Though I knew she might be correct, I still had faith in Will, in what we were doing. I wanted to express this thought, but when I tried to speak, found I couldn't formulate the words. I could no longer think clearly. Suddenly, the large man walked into the room again and looked out the window. Jensen was quickly up and looking. Then he turned to Marjorie and in a casual tone said, "Someone is coming. Go ask Kenny to come up here, please." She nodded and left. Through the window, I could see truck lights approaching, the vehicle parked just outside the fence, 50 feet away. Jensen opened the door. As he did, I heard my name mentioned outside. "Who is that?" I asked. Jensen looked at me sharply. "Be very quiet," he said. He and the large man walked outside and pulled the door closed. Through the window, I could see a lone figure silhouetted behind the truck's lights. My first impulse was to stay inside. Jensen's assessment of my situation had filled me with foreboding. But something about the person by the truck seemed familiar. I opened the door and walked outside. As soon as Jensen saw me, he quickly turned and walked my way. "What are you doing? Go back inside." Above the generator, I thought I heard my name again. "Go back inside now," Jensen said. "It could be a trap." He was standing directly in front of me, blocking my view of the vehicle. "Go back inside now." I felt totally confused and panicked, unable to make a decision. Then the figure behind the lights walked closer, and I could see his form around Jensen's body. Distinctly, I heard, "Come here, I need to talk with you." Then, as the figure approached, my head cleared and I realized that it was Will. I rushed past Jensen. "What was wrong with you?" Will asked quickly. "We need to get out of here." "But what about Marjorie?" I asked. "We can't do anything about her right now," Will said. "We'd better leave." We started to walk away when Jensen called out, "You'd better stay here. You won't make it." I glanced back. Will stopped and looked at me, giving me a choice to stay or go. "Let's go," I said. We passed the truck in which Will had arrived, and I noticed two other men had been waiting in the front seat. When we got to Will's Jeep, he asked me for the keys and we drove away. The truck with Will's friends followed. Will turned and looked at me. "Jensen told me you had decided to stay with this group. What was going on?" "How do you know his name?" I stammered. "I just heard all about this guy," Will replied. "He works for the Peruvian government. He's a real archaeologist, but he's committed to keeping the whole thing secret in return for exclusive rights to study the manuscript. Only he wasn't supposed to go looking for the missing insight. Apparently, he's decided to violate that agreement. He is rumored to be leaving soon in pursuit of the ninth." When I learned he was the person Marjorie was with, I thought I'd better get down here. "What did he say to you?" "He told me I was in danger and that I should join up with him, and that he'd help me leave the country if that's what I wanted." Will shook his head. "He really had you hooked."
So now what does
"What do
this
you
mean?
mean?"
Okay, he really had him hooked. So he was actually not hooking, but hooking him with an energy field.
"You should have seen your energy field. It was flowing almost totally into his." "I don't understand." "Think back to Sarah's argument with the scientist at Vicient. If you had witnessed one of them winning, convincing the other that he was correct, then you would have seen the loser's energy flowing into the winner's, leaving the loser feeling drained and weak and somewhat confused. The way the girl in the Peruvian family appeared and the way he smiled that you look now." "You saw that happening to me?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, "and it was extremely difficult for you to stop his control of you and to pull yourself away. I thought for a minute you weren't going to do it."
So now what happens?
Jesus, I said.
Many times people are in abusive relationships. Okay. Now what is happening? The other person who's abusing the next person has hooked that other person. Now, even if that other person wants to run away, even if they run away, many times they'll come back to that person. Why? Because the energy field has got hooked. So it's like a hook. You hook a person and you just keep reeling that person in.
Jesus, I said, that guy must really be evil. Not really, he said. He's probably only half aware of what he's doing. He thinks he's right to control the situation, and no doubt he learned a long time ago that he could control successfully by following a certain strategy.
So now this
He
becomes
first
important. This
pretends to
becomes
be your
important.
friend.
One second. This becomes important. Okay. Now you learn a pattern and then you just perpetuate that same pattern. And this is again from the amygdala that whatever situation you've been in, if something has worked in that particular situation, if any situation that you're in is has a similarity to the previous occasion, you will start going into the same act or you'll start doing the same thing over and over again if there is similarity between these situations.
He first pretends to be your friend, then he finds something wrong with what you're doing. In your case, that you were in danger. In effect, he subtly undermines your confidence in your own path until you begin to identify with him. As soon as that happens, he has you.
So now again, he
Will
uses the
looked
same strategy over and over again. He'll become your friend and then he'll reel you in. It's as simple as that.
Will looked directly at me. This is only one of many strategies people use to con others out of their energy. You will learn about the remaining ways later in the sixth insight. I wasn't listening. My thoughts were on Marjorie. I didn't like leaving her there. Do you think we should try to get Marjorie? I asked. Not now, he said. I don't think she's in any danger. We can drive out tomorrow as we leave and try to talk to her. We were silent for a few minutes, then Will asked, Do you understand what I said about Jensen not realizing what he was doing? He is no different from most people. He just does what makes him feel the strongest.
So now again, this is important. Most of these patterns are we follow through with them unknowingly without any kind of awareness. So that's why being aware of our patterns become extremely important. Now, when Jensen is doing that, he's grabbing energy from the other person. So naturally, he feels stronger and it makes him feel good. So he keeps doing that over and over again. Should we stop here now? I think we can stop. Anyone, anything? Just let me write down. Anyone, anything? Anyone, anything to say?
Thank you,
Thank you,
Vedanta.
Niket. Actually,
Thank you,
after watching the
Shubhankar.
movie yesterday,
Uh,
it's also becoming more enjoyable.
yeah, because you that yeah,
We had like two, we using we were just hearing and
uh,
then we were also seeing. So, when you use something more, it becomes more of a,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. That's why I thought yesterday and Shivamla was not available, so we'll see the movie.
it
But
was
We'll
really very
continue seeing it.
nice.
We'll continue seeing it. We'll finish.
seeing the movie and then hearing it now was very interesting.
Yeah.
Even I found it very interesting.
So if you all want, we can see the movie and then read also. We can do that also.
Okay, thank
No,
you.
no,
Okay,
no. Let's do
whatever.
it like this. Reading
What?
up
Take
to a
it.
point and then watching the movie up to that point.
Hmm.
Because the movie misses so much stuff. The book gives us
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much
Yeah,
more depth.
it's
Yeah.
better to read
Yeah,
first
that's
and
true.
then
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Chalo,
that's
theek.
Yeah.
true.
So
Yeah.
Right.
we'll see it first and then we'll see.
Better.
yeah,
Yes.
Thank you.
then you
And
understand the movie.
Ram Ram.
Thanks
thank
a
Ram
you.
lot.
Ram.
Thank
Yeah.
you,
Ram Ram.
Shivanya.
Uh,
Thank you.
See
Thank
you all.
Bye
you.
bye.
See you all for
Thank
meditation.
Bye
you.
bye.
See you
Yes,
all
Yeah.
for
thank you.
meditation.
Ram, Ram, Ram.
Ram Ram.
Thank
Ram
you.
Ram.
Bye.
Ram Ram.